The truth is, I should have walked down the aisle that day. Everyone expected me to. My father expected me to. The guests filling the old stone church outside Boston expected me to. Even the man waiting at the altar expected me to. But sometimes the most dangerous thing a woman can do is finally see the truth. I stood in front of the mirror inside the bridal suite, staring at a reflection that didn't feel like mine. The white dress fit perfectly. The pearl earrings belonged to my grandmother. The bouquet of white roses rested on the vanity beside me. From the outside, it looked like a fairy tale. Inside, it felt like a prison sentence. The music from the sanctuary drifted through the walls while rain tapped softly against the windows. Everyone downstairs was celebrating. Everyone except me. My hands shook as I reached for my phone again. I don't know what made me open that message one more time. Maybe instinct. Maybe fate. Maybe the small voice inside me that had been warning me for months. The screen lit up with a conversation I was never supposed to see. A conversation between my fiancé, Nathan Rhodes, and a man whose name I didn't recognize. At first it looked like business. Then I read further. Every word felt colder than the last. They weren't discussing a marriage. They were discussing an arrangement. A transaction. A debt. And somewhere in the middle of those messages was my name. Claire. As if I weren't a person. As if I were simply part of the agreement. My stomach dropped. The room suddenly felt too small. Too warm. Too difficult to breathe in. I sat on the edge of the chair and read the messages again, hoping I had misunderstood. I hadn't. The wedding wasn't about love. It wasn't even about appearances. It was about leverage. My father had known. Nathan had known. Everyone had known except me. A knock sounded on the door. 5 minutes, sweetheart, my father called from the hallway. His voice sounded cheerful. Proud. I closed my eyes. 5 minutes. 5 more minutes before I would walk into a future built on lies. 5 minutes before I handed over the rest of my life to people who had already decided my value. I looked at the bouquet. Then at the diamond ring on my finger. Then at the woman in the mirror. For the first time all morning, I recognized her. She looked terrified. But underneath the fear was something stronger. Anger. I stood up. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. The church bells began ringing outside. Guests were taking their seats. The ceremony was beginning. Not mine. I pulled the ring from my finger and placed it carefully on the vanity beside the roses. Then I lifted my dress, opened the side door of the bridal suite, and stepped into the cold rain. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew one thing. If I stayed, my life would belong to everyone except me. The rain hit my face the second I stepped outside. Within moments, my dress was soaked and clinging heavily around my legs as I ran across the church parking lot. Behind me, the bells continued to ring, announcing a wedding that was no longer going to happen. I heard distant voices. Someone calling my name. Someone opening doors. I did not stop. For the first time in years, I was not running toward a future someone else had chosen for me. I was running away from it. My heels slipped against the wet pavement. I kicked them off without slowing down and kept moving barefoot through the rain. The cold asphalt stung, but I barely felt it. Adrenaline drowned out everything. The parking lot emptied into a narrow side street lined with oak trees and parked vehicles. My breathing came in sharp bursts. I had no suitcase. No plan. No destination. Just a growing certainty that if anyone caught me before I disappeared, they would talk me into going back. They would tell me to be reasonable. To think about family. Reputation. Obligation. They would tell me that sacrifice was part of adulthood. But sacrifice was supposed to mean giving something. Not giving away yourself. A flash of headlights appeared through the curtain of rain. A long black Rolls-Royce turned slowly onto the side street, its engine barely audible. The vehicle looked completely out of place among the modest neighborhood houses surrounding the church. It moved with quiet confidence, like it belonged everywhere. Without thinking, I stepped into the road and raised both hands. The driver immediately hit the brakes. The car stopped less than 10 feet away. For a moment, I simply stood there, chest heaving, rain streaming down my face. Then survival took over. I rushed toward the rear passenger door and pulled the handle. To my shock, it opened. Warm air spilled out from the luxurious interior. I climbed inside and slammed the door behind me. Everything happened so fast that I barely registered my surroundings. Soft leather seats, the faint scent of cedar and expensive cologne, dim ambient lighting, silence. Then I looked up. My breath caught instantly. I was not alone. A man sat across from me in the rear compartment. He looked to be in his early 30s. Dark hair, sharp features, a charcoal suit that fit perfectly. His posture was relaxed, but something about him made the entire vehicle feel smaller, more controlled, more dangerous. His eyes met mine calmly. Green, cold, observant. The kind of eyes that noticed everything. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Rain tapped gently against the windows. Somewhere outside, distant voices continued searching. Inside the car, the silence felt heavier than the storm. Finally, the man glanced toward my wedding dress and then back to my face. "Interesting entrance," he said quietly. His voice was smooth and controlled. Not surprised. Not annoyed. Almost amused. I swallowed hard. "Please drive." The words came out weaker than I intended. His expression did not change. "That depends." My heart sank. Through the rear window, I caught movement near the church parking lot. People were beginning to spread out into the surrounding streets. Looking. Searching. My pulse accelerated. "Please," I repeated. "I just need to get away." The man studied me for another moment. Then, unexpectedly, a faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was not warm. It was not cruel. It was simply the smile of someone who had just recognized a very interesting opportunity. He pressed a button beside him. A privacy divider slid upward between us and the driver. Then he spoke a single sentence. "Drive." As the Rolls-Royce pulled away from the curb, I had no idea that the stranger sitting across from me already knew exactly who I was. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The city blurred past the rain-streaked windows while I sat across from a stranger who seemed completely unaffected by the chaos I had brought into his car. My heartbeat was finally beginning to slow, but every time I thought about the church, about Nathan, about the messages on my phone, a fresh wave of anxiety crashed over me. I tightened my grip on the damp fabric of my dress and stared at the floor. "You're not going to ask where I want to go?" I finally asked. The man looked up from the tablet resting on his lap. "If you knew where you wanted to go, you would have told the driver already." His answer irritated me because it was true. I looked away. Outside, the rain continued falling across the dark Massachusetts roads. "Then maybe drop me at a hotel." A faint smile appeared on his face. "Which one?" I opened my mouth and immediately realized I had no answer. He noticed. Of course he noticed. He seemed like the type of man who missed nothing. The silence stretched again before he spoke. "Running away is easier than deciding where to run to." I hated how accurate that sounded. "You do not know anything about me." "Actually," he said calmly, "I know more than you think." A chill ran down my spine. My eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" Instead of answering, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a small folded handkerchief. He placed it on the seat between us. Only then did I realize rainwater was dripping from my hair onto the leather. "You're shivering," he said. The simple observation somehow felt more unsettling than a threat would have. I picked up the handkerchief reluctantly. "Thank you." "You are welcome, Claire." Every muscle in my body froze. The car suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. Slowly, I looked up. "How do you know my name?" His expression remained completely neutral. The church was not exactly difficult to identify. My pulse accelerated again. "You were watching the wedding?" "No." He paused. But I was aware of it. That answer raised even more questions. Before I could ask another one, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. For the first time since entering the car, something changed in his eyes. Not fear. Not concern. Calculation. He typed a short response and locked the phone again. "What is happening?" I asked. He looked directly at me. "Your disappearance has become a very popular topic." My stomach dropped. Nathan. Your father. Several guests. Probably half the town by now. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes. This was becoming real. There would be calls, questions, explanations. Every bridge behind me was burning without a single flame. I cannot go back, I whispered. I know. I opened my eyes. The certainty in his voice caught me off guard. He was not judging me. He was not questioning my decision. Somehow he already understood. The Rolls-Royce turned through a pair of tall iron gates that appeared out of the darkness. Beyond them stood a massive estate illuminated by warm lights glowing against the storm. I stared through the window. Where are we? The stranger looked out toward the mansion as if arriving home after an ordinary day. Then he turned back toward me. Somewhere nobody will find you tonight. Something about the way he said it made my heart skip. Then he offered his hand. My name is Dominic Vale. I had never heard the name before. Within 24 hours, it would become impossible to forget. The mansion looked less like a home and more like something pulled from another world. Warm golden lights glowed through towering windows while rain rolled down stone walls that seemed older than the town I had just left behind. The Rolls-Royce stopped beneath a covered entrance, but I remained frozen in my seat. Everything about this place felt impossible. 24 hours earlier, I had been worrying about floral arrangements and seating charts. Now I was standing on the edge of a life I did not understand. Dominic stepped out first. The moment he appeared, several people moved toward him. Not rushing, not panicking, simply responding. The way people respond when they are used to following someone without question. That was the first moment I realized power was not always loud. Sometimes it was silent. Sometimes it looked like a man walking through the rain while everyone else adjusted around him. A woman in her 50s greeted me inside with a warm towel and a gentle smile. She introduced herself as Evelyn and led me upstairs before I could ask a dozen questions. The bedroom she showed me was larger than my entire apartment. A fire crackled softly in the fireplace. Fresh clothes waited neatly folded on the bed. Even the guest room felt unreal. Mr. Vale anticipated you might need these, Evelyn said kindly. How could he possibly anticipate that? I asked. Her smile deepened slightly. Mr. Vale anticipates many things. After she left, I stood alone in the room staring at my reflection. My wedding dress was ruined. Rainwater dripped from the lace. My mascara had long since disappeared. I looked exhausted, lost. Yet for the first time all day, I did not feel trapped. I showered, changed into the clothes waiting for me, and sat near the fire. My phone had more than 80 missed calls. Nathan, my father, friends, relatives. Messages stacked endlessly across the screen. Most demanded explanations. Some begged me to come back. One message from my father simply read, "Please tell me where you are." I stared at it for a long time before setting the phone face down. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. When I opened the door, Dominic stood outside. He had removed his jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his white shirt. Somehow he looked even more intimidating without trying. "May I come in?" he asked. The fact that he asked surprised me. I stepped aside. He entered slowly and handed me a small folder. "What is this?" I asked. "Information." My stomach tightened. I opened the folder. Inside were documents. Financial records. Business agreements. Names. Dates. Some of them looked familiar. Others did not. Then I saw Nathan's name. Several times. My pulse immediately quickened. "Why do you have this?" Dominic watched me carefully. "Because I have been looking into Nathan Rhodes for months." The room suddenly felt very quiet. "Why?" I whispered. For the first time since meeting him, something cold appeared behind his eyes. Not anger. Not hatred. Something far more controlled. "Because the man you almost married is connected to a problem that became mine long before it became yours." I looked down at the papers again. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Nothing about today made sense anymore. Dominic moved toward the window and looked out into the darkness beyond the glass. "There is something else you should know, Claire." My chest tightened. Slowly, I looked up. He turned toward me. "I did not end up near that church by accident. I was there because I intended to stop that wedding before it happened." For a moment, I honestly thought I had misheard him. The fire crackled softly behind me while rain tapped against the windows, but every other sound seemed to disappear. "You were going to stop my wedding?" I asked. Dominic nodded once. No hesitation. No attempt to soften the statement. "Yes." I stared at him, searching for some sign that this was a joke. There was none. He looked exactly the same as he had since the moment I climbed into his car. Calm. Controlled. Certain. "Why?" The question came out sharper than I intended. Dominic crossed the room and sat in one of the chairs near the fireplace. "Because Nathan Rhodes was never interested in marriage." I laughed bitterly. Believe me, I figured that part out. His expression remained serious. "What you discovered today was only a fraction of it." He gestured toward the folder still resting in my lap. Reluctantly, I looked down again. More names. More companies. More financial records. The deeper I looked, the less any of it resembled the life Nathan had shown me. The man I thought I knew suddenly felt like a stranger. "I do not understand any of this," I admitted quietly. Dominic leaned forward slightly. "Nathan built relationships the way some people build investments. Every connection had a purpose. Every conversation had a goal." The words hurt more than I wanted to admit. Because somewhere deep down, I already knew they were true. Looking back, Nathan had always been more interested in appearances than people. More interested in outcomes than honesty. I had simply ignored the signs because I wanted to believe the best in him. "Then why me?" I asked. "If everything was a transaction, why marry?" "Me?" Dominic was silent for several seconds. Then he gave an answer I did not expect. "Because of your family." My stomach tightened. "My father." "Your father inherited something years ago." I frowned. "Inherited what?" Dominic looked directly into my eyes. "That is what I have been trying to determine." The answer only created more questions. Frustration bubbled inside me. Everyone keeps talking like I am part of some puzzle. I stood and walked toward the window. My father hides things. Nathan hides things. Now you are telling me there are things I do not know about my own family. Lightning flashed faintly in the distance. The estate grounds stretched endlessly beyond the glass. "There is one thing I do know," Dominic said. I turned back toward him. "What?" His gaze never left mine. "You were never supposed to find those messages before the ceremony." The realization hit me immediately. If I had not checked my phone, if I had not opened that conversation, if I had simply walked down the aisle, my chest tightened. Everything could have unfolded exactly as they planned. Every lie. Every secret. Every hidden motive. Someone wanted me ignorant. Yes. And now? Dominic's expression hardened slightly. "Now several people are very unhappy that you are asking questions." Silence settled between us. Not frightening silence. Thinking silence. The kind that changes everything. I looked down at the folder once more. My eyes landed on a company name repeated several times throughout the documents. Something about it felt familiar. Then I remembered. I had seen the same name before. Not in Nathan's files. Not in my father's office. Somewhere much older. Somewhere from childhood. My breath caught. Slowly, I looked back at Dominic. "I think I have seen this before." For the first time that evening, his calm expression shifted. Just slightly. "But enough." "Where?" he asked. I swallowed hard. "On something that belonged to my mother before she died." The room felt smaller after that. My mother had been gone for almost 15 years, yet somehow her name still had the power to change everything. Dominic remained perfectly still, but I noticed the way his attention sharpened. "Tell me exactly what you remember," he said. I walked back toward the fireplace, trying to organize memories that had spent years buried in the corners of my mind. "It was a jewelry box," I said slowly. "A wooden one. Dark walnut. My mother kept letters inside. Old photographs. Things she never talked about." Dominic listened without interrupting. There was a symbol carved underneath. I remember finding it when I was a kid. I picked up one of the documents from the folder and pointed at the company logo printed in the corner. That symbol looked almost identical to this. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The fire crackled softly between us. Outside, the storm continued rolling across the estate grounds. Finally, Dominic stood and crossed the room. He looked down at the logo, then back at me. Are you certain? I think so. My voice sounded less confident than I wanted. I was young, maybe 10 or 11. But I remember asking my mother about it. What did she say? I laughed quietly. Nothing useful. She smiled and told me some secrets were not dangerous because people knew them. They were dangerous because people forgot them. Dominic's expression changed slightly. It was the first time I had seen genuine surprise from him. She said that. I nodded. Why? He looked away for a moment, as if considering something carefully. Because your mother was apparently wiser than most people I know. The answer only deepened the mystery. I sat down again and rubbed my temples. Exhaustion was finally catching up to me. Everything had happened too fast. The wedding. The messages. The escape. Dominic. The documents. My mother. Every answer seemed to create 3 new questions. My phone vibrated again on the side table. I glanced at the screen. Another message from my father. This one was different. My stomach tightened as I read it. Claire. Do not trust anyone. Especially Dominic Vale. I stared at the words. Then read them again. Dominic noticed immediately. Your father. I nodded slowly. He says I should not trust you. To my surprise, Dominic smiled. Not an offended smile. Not an angry one. Almost the opposite. That is probably the smartest thing he has said all day. I blinked. You are agreeing with him? Trust should be earned. He sat back down across from me. Especially tonight. The honesty caught me off guard. Most people would have defended themselves. Dominic simply acknowledged the truth. We were strangers. Dangerous circumstances did not automatically create trust. Yet somehow that answer made me trust him a little more. Before I could respond, a soft knock sounded at the door. Evelyn entered carrying a silver tray with coffee and sandwiches. The smell alone reminded me that I had barely eaten all day. She set everything down carefully. Then she hesitated. Mr. Vale, she said quietly. There is something you should see. Dominic immediately stood. Something in her tone had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by concern. He followed her into the hallway. The door remained partially open. I could hear low voices. Then silence. A minute later, Dominic returned holding a tablet. His expression had become unreadable again. Calm. Controlled. Dangerous in a way I could not explain. My pulse quickened. What happened? I asked. He placed the tablet on the table between us and turned the screen toward me. A news report filled the display. At the center of the image was a photograph from earlier that afternoon. Me, standing beside Nathan outside the church before the ceremony. Beneath it was a headline that made my blood run cold. Missing bride connected to financial investigation. My eyes remained fixed on the screen long after the headline stopped making sense. Missing bride connected to financial investigation. The words felt unreal. Like they belonged to someone else. Not me. Not the woman who had spent the morning worrying about centerpieces and wedding vows. This is not true, I whispered. Dominic stood beside the table, watching the report without any visible reaction. No, he said calmly. It is not. The news anchor continued speaking while images flashed across the screen. Photographs of the church. Photographs of Nathan. Photographs of me smiling beside people I was no longer certain I knew. Then came the phrase that made my stomach twist. Authorities are seeking information regarding possible connections between several financial entities and individuals close to the wedding party. I grabbed the remote and muted the television. Silence immediately filled the room. They are using me. The realization arrived all at once. Nathan had not simply lost control of a wedding. Someone was building a story. A narrative. One where I became part of the problem instead of the victim. Dominic nodded slightly. That was always the backup plan. I looked at him sharply. You expected this? I expected them to protect themselves. He walked toward the window and folded his arms. People who build lies rarely stop after one. I hated that he made everything sound so logical. Because logic meant planning. Planning meant intention. And intention meant this had been unfolding long before I discovered those messages. My phone vibrated again. This time it was not my father. It was an unknown number. I hesitated before opening the message. Then my breath caught. Attached was an old photograph. A photograph I had never seen before. My mother stood beside a younger version of my father. Both were smiling. Behind them was a lake I vaguely recognized from childhood vacations. But that was not what froze me. Standing beside them was another man. Tall. Dark-haired. Wearing a suit despite the summer sunlight. I slowly looked up from the screen. Dominic had already seen my expression. "What is it?" Without speaking, I handed him the phone. His eyes narrowed the moment he saw the image. For the first time since I met him, genuine emotion crossed his face. Not fear. Not surprise. Recognition. He stared at the photograph for several seconds before returning the phone. "Where did you get this?" "Someone just sent it to me." My voice felt distant. "Do you know him?" Dominic did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked back toward the fire and looked into the flames. The silence stretched so long that I thought he might refuse to answer altogether. Finally, he spoke. "That man was my father." The room seemed to tilt beneath me. I looked down at the photograph again. My mother. My father. Dominic's father. Standing together years before I was born. Every question I had been carrying suddenly became heavier. Nothing about this was random. Nothing about today was accidental. The church. Nathan. My family. Dominic. Somehow all of it connected to a past nobody wanted to discuss. I looked up slowly. How is that possible? Dominic met my eyes across the room. His voice remained calm, but something deeper moved beneath it now. Something personal. That, he said quietly, is exactly what I intend to find out. Sleep should have been impossible after that revelation, but exhaustion eventually won. I do not remember falling asleep. I only remember waking a few hours later to pale morning light filtering through the curtains and a strange feeling that everything had changed while I was unconscious. For a moment I forgot where I was. Then reality returned all at once. The wedding. Nathan. The documents. The photograph. Dominic's father standing beside my parents years before either of us understood what it meant. I dressed quickly and made my way downstairs. The estate was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that exists in places where people know their responsibilities without being told. I followed the smell of coffee into a large study lined with bookshelves. Dominic stood near a desk covered with papers and old photographs. He looked like he had not slept at all. "You are awake," he said. I glanced at the photographs spread across the desk. Some were decades old. Others appeared newer. "Have you been looking at these all night?" I asked. "Most of it." His attention remained on one particular image. Slowly, I stepped closer. The photograph showed a lakeside cabin. My mother stood on the porch smiling at the camera. Beside her stood Dominic's father. On the back of the photograph, someone had written a date from nearly 25 years earlier. Beneath it were 3 words. Project Aurora Archive. My breath caught. "What is that?" Dominic looked up. "That is what we are trying to understand." He handed me another document. Unlike the financial records, this one looked much older. The paper had yellowed with age. At the top was the same symbol I remembered from my mother's jewelry box. The same symbol connected to the company logo. The same symbol connected to secrets everyone seemed determined to hide. "My father spent years searching for this archive," Dominic said quietly. "He believed it contained information that disappeared before either of us were born." I looked at the document. Then back at him. "Information about what?" Before he could answer, another voice spoke from the doorway. "About why your parents were being watched." Both of us turned instantly. An older man stood there holding a folder beneath one arm. His silver hair was neatly combed. His suit looked expensive but worn from years of use. Dominic's expression hardened. "Victor." The man nodded. "I apologize for arriving unannounced." His eyes moved toward me. "Claire, I knew your mother." The words hit me harder than they should have. Everyone suddenly seemed to know things about my family except me. Victor stepped forward and placed the folder on the desk. "There is no easy way to say this," he continued. "Your mother did not leave that symbol behind by accident. She was protecting something." My pulse accelerated. Dominic opened the folder immediately. Inside were copies of letters, photographs, notes, Evidence of a story that stretched back decades. Then I saw the final page. A handwritten letter signed with my mother's name. At the bottom was a sentence that made my entire body go still. If anything happens to me, Claire must never learn what is hidden inside the wedding heirloom. The words blurred in front of me. I read the final sentence again and again, hoping it would somehow change. It never did. If anything happens to me, Claire must never learn what is hidden inside the wedding heirloom. My hands trembled as I lowered the letter. The room had gone completely silent. Even the grandfather clock in the corner seemed quieter. The wedding heirloom, I whispered. What does that mean? Victor exchanged a glance with Dominic. Neither man answered immediately. That hesitation told me everything. They knew more than they were saying. The pearl brooch, I said suddenly. A memory surfaced from nowhere. My mother wearing a small antique brooch during family celebrations. The same brooch my father insisted should be attached to my bouquet that morning. My stomach dropped. It was at the wedding. Dominic's eyes narrowed. Are you certain? I nodded. My father gave it to me before the ceremony. He said my mother would have wanted me to carry it. The realization struck all three of us at the same time. I had been holding the answer only hours earlier without knowing it. Victor opened another file and carefully removed an old photograph. There was my mother again, smiling beside the lake. The brooch was pinned to her dress. Zoomed into the image was the same symbol we had been chasing through documents, letters, and memories. Your mother hid something inside it, Victor said quietly. We believed that for years, but we could never prove it. I sank into a chair. The room suddenly felt too warm, too bright. Everything I thought I knew about my family had unraveled in less than 24 hours. My mother had not simply left memories behind. She had left clues, warnings, a trail. Dominic walked to the window and stared across the estate grounds. Morning sunlight had finally broken through the storm clouds. For the first time since arriving, the world outside looked peaceful. Nathan knew, he said. Or at least suspected. I looked up. That is why he wanted the marriage. Dominic nodded slowly. The wedding was never the goal. The heirloom was. The truth settled over me like a weight. Nathan had not chosen me because he loved me. He had chosen me because he believed I would eventually lead him to something valuable. Something hidden. Something connected to a secret older than either of us. Oddly enough, instead of sadness, I felt clarity. For the first time, the confusion was beginning to fade. I stood and walked toward the desk. Then we find it first. Victor looked surprised. Dominic did not. If anything, he looked almost proud. You understand what that means? He asked. I met his gaze. The fear that had controlled me since the church was still there, but it no longer owned me. It means I stop running. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Not the cold smile from the car. Something warmer. More human. Dominic reached into his pocket and carefully placed a small object on the desk between us. My breath caught instantly. It was my engagement ring. The one I had left behind on the vanity before fleeing the church. How did you get that? I asked. Dominic looked directly into my eyes. Because some things deserve to be returned to their rightful owner. Then he gently pushed the ring toward me and said, Keep it, Claire. Not as a promise to him. As a reminder that the moment you walked away was the moment your real story began.